As is the case with many great stories, Armored Core 6 is about the sins of the past coming to haunt the present. It started on the planet Rubicon 3, a planet on the frontier of human development, where a sublime substance was found, coral, revolutionary for both fuel and data conduits. And so Rubicon was colonized, and an organization was established to study and develop coral-based technologies, the Rubicon Institute. The center of this organization can still be found today, the ruined Institute City. Vast and advanced, it is a testament to the power and influence of this organization before its collapse. At the center, the vascular plant, so named because it acts like the vascular organ of this city, but instead of blood, this plant controlled the flow of coral. The appeal of coral technology is easily understood when one lays eyes on leftover Institute technology. Not only does it outstrip anything the corporations produce currently, half a century later, but it's also incredibly energy efficient. Ayre herself comments on the fact that Institute machines are still running, despite the period of time that has passed.
That machine was running on stable energy for half a century. Perhaps it should be no surprise that humanity so desires coral.
But what is coral? What is this substance? Because by the end of Chapter 1, when we make contact with Ayre, you must realise that this is no ordinary substance. Well, the Rubicon Institute's final director, Professor Nagai, gives us the answer directly in Log 1, which reads, "Coral is an organic substance capable of self-propagation. The speed at which it proliferates is determined by the density of the colony. Therefore, coral is a living substance, which is why Ayre is so horrified to learn that the coral is used as a fuel."
They were using coral for fuel.
Coral is able to multiply when it gathers as well, and that is what it has been slowly doing in the half-century since the fires of Ibis.
The fires of Ibis should have wiped the coral out, but it survived, gathered, and it's been steadily multiplying ever since. Now the coral convergence is growing at an exponential rate.
Coral is also capable of mutations, as Log 1 continues. However, one must not overlook the signs of mutations within the coral brought about by this density effect. It is mutations such as these that will bring about a collapse that humanity has no hope of controlling, and it was this fear of the coral and its mutations that would lead to the fires of Ibis. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. While we don't know how long the Institute was in operation for, we do have an idea of some of the key players at the end of its life cycle. In a ruined AC in the stagnant water of the collapsed mausoleum of Cinders is an interesting data file, one of the last pieces of work by a human artist known as STK. The description tells us that this is one of the last pictures by a human artist, whose style would be copied and replicated by AI for future generations, a cutting commentary on the state of art today. But more pertinent to the lore is the content of said picture. STK was clearly an important witness to events at the Rubicon Institute, and they documented 4 of its most important characters here in this image: a professor, 2 assistants, and a child. Thankfully, we can get a pretty good idea of who these characters are, and how relevant they are to 621's story, and we can piece this together thanks to some other journal entries found throughout the game. The professor is the aforementioned Professor Nagai, of course, who was the last Rubicon Institute director, a fact outright stated in his journal entries. The 3 other people from the sketch are also mentioned in Nagai's different logs, the 2 assistants and a child. Log 2 and 3 confirm that Nagai had 2 assistants, and that Assistant 1 had a child. Log 3 reads, "I have decided that Assistant number 1's son is to remain at the lab. He's a reticent one, tough too, beyond his years, and now our research has robbed him of his mother and driven his father mad. Perhaps Assistant number 2 will be able to help. She does seem to have a knack for assembling toys, I hope that at least she can give him something to smile about. So a lot to unpack there, but let's start with assistant number 2, a female known for tinkering. So Cinder Carla is a character we experience in the current timeline in our mission, an ally at least for some time. When we first encounter Carla, when we go to the Rad base, Ayre comments on her nickname, Cinder, a nickname that Rubiconians give to survivors of the fires of Ibis.
Cinder. Carla's nickname? That's what the Rubiconians call survivors of the fires of Ibis. But if the fires happened half a century ago...
So she was there half a century ago. At least that's what her nickname suggests. Secondly, Carla is known to be an excellent engineer, tinkerer, programmer, etc. A fact that is reinforced in her Arena Lore tab that says she is a specialist in data processing and machine design, even going as far to say that she is a fount of knowledge with an imaginative genius. Carla has taken over RAD, and RAD's influence is essentially down to Carla's weapon production and design, and there are plenty examples of her genius, from building an AI like Chatty, the fact she hacks Allmind when we are doing an arena fight with her simulation, and the creation of the anti-iceworm railgun. And thus I think Carla quite clearly fits the pattern for assistant number 2, a female who is a Cinder, i.e. someone who was around at the time of the fires of Ibis, and who is a specialist in building things. So let's move on to the other 2 figures, Assistant 1 and the boy, who get further elaboration in Professor Nagai's log 2, which reads, Assistant number 1 has lost his mind. His research has utterly consumed him. Granted, there may be some logic to C-Pulse sensory augmentation of human subjects, but no ethical scholar would dare cross that point of no return. The idea that this scientist's work consumed him is reinforced by the information found in log 3, which describes the fact that the boy has lost his father to the research. And then, in our own journey, Walter tells us a story. He doesn't say who this story is about, but it chimes very closely to the facts we've just discussed.
Let me tell you a story before you go. There once was a scientist. He abandoned his family to delve into the secrets of coral. His work yielded a carnival of horrors, augmentation surgery included. But there was another scientist. He took his colleagues' sins upon himself and set it all ablaze. Died with no regrets. There's a lesson in this story. Once something's alive, it doesn't die easy.
Walter knows this story so personally because, to me, he is the child. He speaks of this scientist with such familiarity and sadness because he was directly affected by it, losing both of his parents. And aside from this, for me, he chimes very closely to the description of the child that Nagai gives in log number 3, reticent and tough beyond his years. In Professor Nagai's log number 2, he states that he saw Walter's abandonment and decided to take him under his wing. Walter's fears about the coral are basically a carbon copy of Nagai's fears. In Nagai's log number 1, Nagai says the following: However, one must not overlook the signs of mutations within the coral, brought about by this density effect. It is mutations such as these that will bring about a collapse that humanity has no hope of controlling. Then, in a later message to us, Walter says the following of the coral.
Now the coral convergence is growing at an exponential rate. Eventually, it'll spill out from Rubicon and contaminate space itself. The coral must be burned. 621.
Both have the exact same fears, that coral, when it becomes so dense, will mutate uncontrollably, spill out into the stars, and cause a calamity for humanity. The fact that this speech is so similar to Nagai's log, to me, is further evidence that he was Nagai's student, the boy that was taken under Nagai's wing, which is why he now echoes such similar sentiments. The fact that Walter was here during the Rubicon Institute days explains a lot about his knowledge as well. He seems to know everything about the Rubicon Institute despite others not knowing anything about these models. When we face the Ibis model, he immediately knows what it is, despite the fact that most people wouldn't have a clue. And it seems that Walter already knows where they're going to find the coral convergence, a fact that Ayre is quite suspicious about.
Walter, it's like he already knows where the coral convergence is. What makes him so confident?
When we get attacked by Rubicon Institute models in the alternate Sandcrawler mission, he immediately recognises them as Rubicon Institute models. All this knowledge just reinforces the fact that Walter was that boy, a boy who was taken under the wing of the Rubicon Institute director. The examples go on, but Walter being there at the Rubicon Institute half a century ago explains so much within the lore. And so if Walter is the child of Assistant 1, Assistant 1 was Walter's father, the assistant described in Nagai's log 2, who first created coral augmentation technology, but was utterly consumed by his work. This also means that the two men described in Walter's story were Walter's father and Professor Nagai, with Walter's father being the one who abandoned his family, and Nagai being the one who burned it all away. With that said, let us now put all this together. And so we have Assistant 1, Walter's father, who developed augmentation, clearly someone who saw the potential in coral and human symbiosis, heedless of the consequences. Then you have Assistant number 2, a talented engineer, Carla. And then you have the boy, Walter, the abandoned son of Assistant number 1. It is this complex set of relationships that forms the foundation of 621's story in the present. Log number 4 shows that Nagai feared a collapse due to coral mutation, fearing that an event would happen that would be beyond human control. And as we see in the coral release ending, he isn't exactly wrong, it just depends whether you think this is a good thing or a bad thing. And so when these mutations started to multiply at a rapid rate, Nagai ordered the Ibis system to be deployed. Now we face something called an Ibis series at the end of Act 4 at the heart of Institute City, and Walter tells us that this is an Ibis series model, and so we can assume that its purpose is linked to the same Ibis program that Nagai deploys. In the middle of our battle with this Ibis series, Walter does tell us the purpose of these models.
Listen up, 621. The Ibis series are no ordinary weapons. They're designed to prevent coral disasters, a security measure to keep Rubicon safe. And now their original masters are long gone.
These are essentially defense systems meant to protect the coral, Rubicon, and prevent a collapse. Therefore, I extrapolate this to mean the entire Ibis program is meant to safeguard the coral and prevent a collapse. From these non-piloted craft to the HAL-piloted models, and finally to the Ibis program, that I believe was a man-made trigger to burn the coral. The fires of Ibis was no accident, it was a man-triggered event. When we choose the ending that involves us burning the coral away, the resulting fires are called the Fires of Raven because we caused it, and therefore the fires of Ibis must be caused by the Ibis program. Logs 4 and 5 make it pretty clear that Nagai was the one who triggered this, but definitive proof comes in the form of a final log. We find a burned out AC on the top of one of the tallest buildings in Institute City. From this AC we can get a video log. The image shows the very start of the fires of Ibis, as if the pilot was witnessing the events, and the text transcript of this recording reads the following. 12 minutes remain. I have done all that I must. I alone shall bear the burden of watching the fires of Ibis burn. Whatever future awaits the boy, I hope he grows into a man strong enough to seize it. I have friends in Jupiter colonies. Surely they will look after him. The fires of Ibis was not a coral reaction or mutation. It was a man-made incident. And coral, a living material, was thought to be burned away. And Nagai shouldered the burden of his choice. He knew that he was killing a living thing. He knew that he'd be scorching an entire planet and surrounding systems. Yet he thought it was the best choice. But he didn't think he should get away with it. And so he remained as a sort of vigil, He would not shy away from the decision he had made, and thus, at the top of a tall building in Institute City, he burned with the planet. Nagai died in the fires, and he put his trust in the boy Walter and his assistant Carla, should the coral ever rise again. Walter went to live off-world in the Jupiter colonies. Carla remained on the planet, becoming a Cinder, her previous involvement with the Rubicon Institute clearly forgotten, and she got involved with the Dozer factions as cover, and so she could build up an arsenal as a sort of side project. But before we dive any further into the lore, I am delighted to announce that Factor has once again decided to partner with Smalltown, providing you with the perfect meal to fuel up with between sorties. Factor takes convenience to the next level by offering fully prepared meals that are ready in minutes, removing the hassle of meal planning while leaving you with no mess, meaning you can get back to your 15th attempt at Baltius as fast as possible. Many of us in this modern day and age spend the majority of our time sitting down, whether you are working or pushing those S ranks in Armored Core 6. Thankfully, Factor can help you achieve a healthier diet with its calorie smart options from the 27 plus options per week. Meal plans range from 4 to 18 meals a week depending on your needs, and there is something for everyone, whether you require keto, vegan or vegetarian options. Best of all, Factor can keep you off the takeaways by providing no-nonsense food that's ready in minutes, whilst also saving you money. So use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code POGSMOSEP50 for 50% off your first box. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Thanks again to Factor for sponsoring this video, and now back to the lore. Forged in ash, we fight as one. So cry the RLF. For not all life was obliterated when the fires of Ibis hit. Indeed, as we have already discussed, a colloquial term is coined for those who were on the planet when the flames of Ibis hit. Cinders. Those who were burned but did not die. A new identity and culture was formed among those who remained on Rubicon after the fires of Ibis and after it was closed. Those who identify as Rubiconians. With the return of the corporations in the current timeline, these Rubiconians would not stand idly by and let their new way of life be obliterated for corporate gain, hence the need for the Rubicon Liberation Front. It seems as though this movement began among the Dozer population, essentially a term for people who abuse coral as a sort of drug. One of these Dozers was a man known as Dolmayan, and this person would become the philosophical founding father of the RLF, as well as the founder of coral mysticism. We learn of this via his arena lore description, which reads the following. Father of the Rubicon Liberation Front, veteran military commander, and founder of the School of Coral Mysticism. As a young man, Dolmayan was once a Dozer vagrant, until the fires of Ibis burned the star system. In the fire's aftermath, he developed an ardent belief in symbiosis with the coral. This belief informed the founding ideals of the Rubicon Liberation Front, ideals that have made martyrs of countless coral warriors. Coral mysticism is an interesting term, and it is no doubt a response to the experience that Dolmayan had, that is not unlike ours with Ayre. While our connection was made with Ayre through our augmentation of our sensory capacities, his was made through his abuse and ingestion of coral. He eventually made contact with a voice, and he clearly, at least initially, interpreted this as a spiritual connection. The Rubiconians and the RLF are people whose identity is mainly based around the protection of the planet and the coral, and viewing greedy outsiders as a threat. This sentiment is well summarised by the video record Rubicon Invective, which reads, "They say that coral was plentiful, infinite, before the fires of Ibis, and then the Institute burned this planet dry. The academics in their ivory tower underestimated the power of Rubicon's blessing, and when it laid their weakness bare, they burned it all to ash. Their ideology is based on a respect and love for both Rubicon and the coral. Forged in ash, we fight as one doesn't just refer to the humans, but to the planet as well. They have a symbiotic relationship with the coral, and feel as though they do not exploit it in the same way that greedy corporations do, that they live in harmony with it, and that they have a spiritual understanding of its nature. They believe in their bond with the coral with an almost religious fervour, which is why they fight so zealously and refer to themselves as coral warriors. When it comes to the military strength of the RLF, they do have multiple tools at their disposal, including the Strider, multiple MTs, and they even have their own AC pilots. And regarding these AC pilots, Dom's Roundtable on Twitter made a really interesting observation, that each of the RLF pilots are named after a finger on a hand, perhaps to represent that they are the hand or the fist of Rubicon. So yeah, that's a really interesting little fact, and shout out to Dom's Roundtable for making that observation. But it isn't just a religious dependence. The Rubiconians simply would not have survived without the coral. They were essentially isolated on a planet that had been scorched, where it would have been impossible to grow crops, and it's likely there were very few forms of life even still alive after the fires of Ibis. Instead, they ate mealworms that had grown large due to the effects of coral. When we go down into Watchpoint Alpha, we find some of these massive mealworms, and Walter even comments that there are breeding pods for these mealworms. Indeed, there is a log which further confirms that this is the way that Rubiconians survive, and one of their reasons for actually fighting against the corporations is that they will not survive if the corporations continue to squeeze coral out of them, because they need it to grow their mealworms that they depend on for food. But with the practicalities discussed, let us move back to the idea of coral mysticism and what Dolmayan actually experienced within the coral. We know that Dolmayan had a experience similar to ours because he directly tells us so when we face off against him in Xylem City.
You can see them too, the voices. Just as I once did.
The records state that Dolmayan was a dozer in his younger days. Perhaps he experienced mind-altering effects not unlike the contact we share.
Saria, forgive me. Forgive this old craven.
This Saria that he mentions was likely his Ayre, the voice that he communicated with via his connection to the coral network. Indeed, Dolmayan does mention a she when talking about the voice that he speaks to in the coral network in his log number 2. But this log is interesting for another reason, as it seems to be that Dolmayan is expressing guilt for tricking Saria and for imbibing the coral, because he knows it isn't true partnership, it isn't true symbiosis. While the RLF seem to believe that their relationship with coral is mutually beneficial, it is far more beneficial to humanity. The way in which the RLF use coral is essentially consumption. Whilst they don't exploit it and use it as fuel to nearly the same degree that the corporations want to, the way in which we see Arquebus gathering all of it at the end of the game, they are still relying upon it, they are still using it for their own benefit. And it seems as though Father Dolmayan's coral mysticism isn't all it appears to be. Log 1 of Dolmayan's writings, evidently one of his earliest, breaks down this symbiosis to its brass tacks. It was consumption that was needed for humanity to survive. And so no wonder when a voice started speaking to him from the inside of the coral, from the substance that was allowing him to survive, he believed it was like a gift from the gods. Not only did this miraculous material give them highs, but also let them survive, but it was now speaking to them. And this is why Dolmayan expresses guilt in log number 2, whilst Saria believes that this is a symbiosis by eating the coral. Dolmayan knows deep down that this isn't true symbiosis, it is just eating to survive. Yet after a time, Saria believed she found another way, a way in which true symbiosis between humans and coral could take place. She spoke of coral release, and we learn about this in his 4th log, which reads the following. As always, she whispers to me from the inside. She tells me that she found something in the journals of Institute City, something about the potential for symbiosis, coral release. If such a thing is truly possible, then perhaps I can join her on the other side. Coral release is true symbiosis, and is the objective we achieve in the 3rd ending of the game. So out of guilt and a genuine desire to achieve a true symbiosis, Father Dolmayan clearly looked into it, but was horrified by what he saw. Indeed, this is why he talks down to little Zihi during the rescue mission.
Father Dolmayan has been extracted.
Thank goodness you're safe, Father. Coral abide with Rubicon.
You don't know what you're saying, girl. There'll be nothing left but dying embers.
He fears what would happen during a Coral release. Father Dolmayan in his fight with us says he used to hear voices, meaning he has now cut off his connection to Seria. He is very much sobered on Coral mysticism. Thus, during his fight with us, he breaks down the full wording of the RLF's chants.
How much of our hymn have you heard, Menace? Coral, abide with Rubicon. Coral, endure within us all. For none of us shall cast the die. The coral must not be set free. Only tragedy awaits beyond the threshold.
So in reality, the Rubiconians' version of symbiosis is just to keep Coral within Rubicon, to keep it as a resource for Rubiconians to stay alive, but to keep the status quo, and to not cast the dice on full symbiosis. Indeed, even the shorter version of the RLF hymn means this as well. Coral, abide with Rubicon. Abide means to conform, to keep, to accept, to remain. And so when the RLF say Coral abide with Rubicon, they mean Coral stay with Rubicon, to accept the status quo for what it is. And to confirm this, Father Dolmayan straight up tells us that the Coral must not be set free. And as he dies, he does apologise to Seria for being too cowardly to pursue Coral release. Indeed, the final commentary is given by Allmind, who condemns the RLF's symbiosis as a one-sided suppression of the Coral's potential.
Target destroyed. Good. The Rubiconian symbiosis is no more than suppression and exploitation of Coral. We hope this encounter was informative.
Dolmayan attacks us here because he detects that we have a connection with Ayre, much like he used to, and he knows that this will lead to the same place that his and Seria's discussions did, to Coral release. Likewise, Candlering, a member of the RLF, is sent to kill us by Dolmayan. We learn from Candlering's lore tab in the arena that he is Dolmayan's paramour, and very loyal to him and him alone, and so it makes sense that Father Dolmayan would send Candlering after us first, before going after us himself. You could see what happens at the end of Coral release, your consciousness being merged with the Coral and spread all throughout the galaxy as pretty horrifying. And ultimately there will be those among the Rubiconians that just like their way of life that they've developed over the past half century and don't want things to change. But with all that said, the Liberation Front are not an evil organisation despite this perhaps selfishness in regards to symbiosis. Indeed, many of its members fight for a fairly admirable goal. More grounded individuals like Middle Flatwell seem not to be bothered by Coral fanaticism that consumes much of its membership. Indeed, he seems to have a more practical goal in mind, to free Rubicon from outsiders and protect it and its peoples from being overexploited. Likewise, his ally Rusty has a similar mindset, to protect Rubicon and set it free from the injustices of greedy corporations. Because of this, I see ending B as the best ending in the game, as this is just a practical liberation of Rubicon from outsiders. We will return to the Liberation Front when we talk about the corporations and who has secretly aligned with them. But for now, let's move on to the next subject. Given we have touched on Ayre and Seria, I do think we need to talk about augmented humans and what these mutations actually are. We know that augmented humans are those who have had their senses augmented with Coral, thanks to Nagai log number 2. Hence why augmented humans are quite commonly AC pilots, because they have faster augmented senses, better reaction times and reflexes. Indeed, Ayre confirms that this coral technology is what made us when we pick up this specific log.
This is about the first augmented humans. The same coral technology that created you. But without it, we never would have made contact.
So Ayre confirms that our mind has been altered by this coral technology. And indeed, it is this fusion of human and coral that allows us to bridge the gap with the coral network and make contact with beings like Ayre. In a way, because of this augmentation, we are now connected and part of the coral network, which is why we see it a number of times during our journey. It's a thing that other people cannot see.
Raven? You see it too, don't you? The voices of the coral. Currents coursing across Rubicon.
It also seems as though that it's only older versions of human augmentation, more crude ones, who are able to make this connection. During the Allmind path in New Game Plus 2, Allmind comments on the fact that only specific augmented humans are capable of being key to the release project, and as we learn later, we are the trigger for the coral release because we are bridged between humanity and coral.
The release project must succeed. Only an exceptional augmented human can be the key. C4621, Raven.
And in the background, as Allmind is saying this, you can see a list of potential candidates, and she is only showing humans from the first 4 generations of augmented humans. Secondly, Walter comments on the fact that hearing voices is a common problem with older gen models.
You said you could hear a strange voice in your head. That's a common side effect of old gen augmentation.
Hearing voices of course implies that the older gen could all hear the voices within the coral, and as the process got more sophisticated with later gen augmentations, like Snail and Freud, this was no longer an issue, and thus these augmented humans, the later ones, are unsuitable bridges. For example, Maeterlinck's lore tab in the arena tells us that by generation 8 of augmented humans, the issues with prior generations were essentially eradicated, and many of the Vespers are of these later generations, like Pater, Snail, and Freud. Both us and Iguazu are of the generation 4, and both of us can hear voices within the coral. So that's all well and good, but what is Ayre? What is this very human voice reaching out to us from within the coral network?
That damn noise. It was you all along.
Well, Allmind identifies her as a C-wave mutation.
C4621, Raven. C-pulse wave mutation, Ayre.
And in Nagai's log 1, he also speaks of how coral is subject to mutation when it becomes dense. So coral is alive, and we could just say that these aberrations are mutations and then just move on. However, I just think that is only part of the picture. When you first connect with Ayre at the end of Act 1, following the coral explosion in the watch point, she begs you to wake up, or else your consciousness will be scattered forever within the coral flow. So we learn here that it is possible for a human mind to become part of the coral network, and this makes sense given the way we are able to connect to the coral network as an augmented human. In a way, we are part of it, it's just that we are able to retain our sense of self as well. Later on, Ayre refers to herself as a Rubiconian without a body.
There's something I have to tell you. The coral. It's my family. My brothers and sisters. I am but a single wave, born from the coral tide. A Rubiconian without a body.
Now, this just may be a turn of phrase, that she identifies herself as a Rubiconian because Rubicon is her home, as much as it would be for a human. However, it could be, literally, that Ayre was once a Rubiconian human, whose consciousness somehow became part of the coral network. The most logical candidates for those who would become one with the coral flow would of course be augmented humans, given that that seems to be something that could happen to us. We know from Sulla's Arena lore tab that Generation 1 augmented humans had a very low survival rate, 10%. Perhaps many of these early test subjects died because their minds were scattered into the coral flow. When we get to the Allmind chapter of this video, you will see that I argue that Allmind seems to be a continuation of Assistant 1's work. Allmind's goal, essentially, is to merge human and coral completely, and one could see augmented humans not just as a way to get superior pilots, but as a stepping stone in achieving that aim. Perhaps that was part of the aim of augmenting humans, to bridge that gap. This is of course only speculation, but for me, Ayre is too human. She's not alien enough to simply be a mutation of a living substance, to be a mutation born purely of coral. She is a mutation, but one that is created from the neural connections made by humanity. So to wrap up my thoughts on this, we clearly get plenty of evidence that humans can become part of the coral neural network by connecting with it through augmentation. And so it's my belief that these specific personalities of Ayre and Seria were once humans that have now reformed and are a C-wave mutation that can communicate with us. And that is why they are so human in the way that they speak and the fact they even name themselves. Because in general, aside from that, the coral doesn't have a sense of individuality. And before we move on, I do want to talk about the coral as a whole and the way it behaves as a sort of hive mind. We know that coral acts on instinct. We know this from the way it behaves following the Belius explosion, and it then seems to migrate to try and find the coral convergence.
The localized coral explosion caused by the surge has a certain directionality. It's headed straight for the central ice field across the Allian Ocean. Like a flock of birds or a school of fish, coral loves company.
Indeed, Ayre, despite having her own individuality, seems to feel that same pull.
Coral has an instinct to gather together, and it seems I am no exception.
This instinct makes perfect sense. All biological life forms have an instinct to act in a way which propagates their species. Coral grows in number, the more dense it is. This is just a very basic survival and animal instinct that the coral has. Just as other biological life forms have an instinct to mate, coral has an instinct to gather and become dense because that's how it replicates and ultimately increase in number. We also get evidence of this sort of instinctual behaviour at the end of Act 4, when we face down the Ibis series model. The Ibis series is meant to be an autonomous model designed by the Rubicon Institute to defend the coral and prevent a collapse. Yet Ayre tells us something interesting, that it is controlled by the coral, not only powered by it.
It's not just powered by coral. I think it's controlled by coral too.
And that the reason it was attacking us is because it inherited the original purpose of this model, to defend the coral. A very instinctive way to behave.
The coral resonance, it's fading. The machine's resolve, inherited from its creators. Voices from the past.
So when we fight this extremely difficult boss, we are actually fighting the coral itself, which is instinctively defending itself with this model. So let us summarise. Coral is a living substance that contains a neural network and quite often acts instinctively like many living things. Human consciousness is able to connect to this network and then become part of it. Early augmented humans seem to have had their brainwaves lifted up into this network. And Allmind's final plan is to have all humans merged with this network, the full potential of humanity and coral achieved. But we will talk about that more later. One final thing I want to note is about Walter's mother. We mentioned earlier that Nagai notes that Walter lost his mother because of this research. Does this merely mean that she was driven to the edge because her husband was obsessed with this research? Or does it mean in a direct sense, was she a test subject for the augmented human program? Does she now exist in the coral neural network? These questions are impossible to answer for certain, but it's an interesting idea to ponder nonetheless. Observe, prevent, intervene. There was another organisation that grew in the ashes of Rubicon following the fires of Ayre, Overseer, the Association of Observers, those that inherited Nagai's burden, Walter, Carla, and seemingly many others. At this time they merely waited, observing the coral growth, waiting for the moment it would gather and need to be burned away permanently.
Let me tell you a story, tourist. After the fires of Ibis burnt the planet up, a secret organization formed, hiding in the ashes. Overseer, the Association of Observers. They monitored the coral's growth, ready to burn it before the collapse came. That was their mission. Our mission. Me, Walter, and our fallen friends.
Key members like Carla lay the groundwork for the future, building her own power base and cover within RAD, while Walter was off-world, presumably doing his own preparations that allowed him to become the sophisticated handler he is today. Rubicon was sealed by a group known as the PCA, the Planetary Closure Authority, whose technology far eclipses that of the corporations. We of course learn that the reason the PCA is so sophisticated is because they have helped themselves to the Institute technology, but for the purposes of keeping Rubicon sealed. I think it is clear that it is the PCA that unleashes the Sea Spider at the end of Act 2. After failing to kill us with their orbital lasers, the Sea Spider drops on us from above. It is important for the PCA to stop us here, as they know that the intercontinental launcher will take us to the area where the coral convergence is happening. Then of course later they unleash the Ice Worm. These two beasts are example of Institute technology that the PCA have straight up taken wholesale. But I think the implication is clear that the reason PCA mechs and their ACs are so advanced is because they have used Institute technology. Things like the Enforcer are far beyond the capabilities of any of the corporations, and the light and heavy cavalry used by PCA Special Forces is far more advanced than any AC. We know from one of the logs found in Mission 1 of Act 3 that the PCA initially occupied the planet with bases, but largely abandoned these when the orbital gun system was completed, the closure system. Aside from this, they are well armed. Sites of coral interest, like the watch point from Chapter 1, are guarded by the planetside PCA force known as Subject Guard. These are mainly MT squads, albeit well armed ones. However, their main might comes from their heavy suppression fleet, the closure system itself, and their enforcement squads. Their enforcement squads pilot advanced SP Edromoy craft, and these act as headhunters for high-value targets. The mainstay forces of the PCA are no joke either. Alongside MTs, they have AC light craft known as Light and Heavy Cavalry, LC and HCs, and these are piloted by high-ranking PCA officers. Carrying on the cavalry metaphor, they also have the Cataphract, their most experimental enforcement squad item, a fearsome augmented MT that looks and fires like a tank but moves like an AC. And going by the story trailer, it was a Cataphract that wiped out Walter's previous hounds. But one of the most interesting things about the PCA is the fact they are run by an AI. In numerous missions you will hear PCA officers referring to a system and relaying requests to it. Indeed, the fact that this AI is running the PCA is outright confirmed by a dozer log. And for a while I had to consider whether or not this AI was also Allmind, because it's the other major AI that we know of. And on a surface level you could see that the PCA's objectives align with Allmind's. By keeping the coral safe, she would be able to work on the coral, moving towards coral release. Of course this is not the case because we see examples of the PCA directly clashing with Allmind's objectives. During the Allmind path, we are sent with another Allmind agent, Kate Markson, to Bow's Arsenal No. 2 to actually dispatch of a PCA inspection team. It's clear that Allmind does not want the PCA discovering the coral spring found within this arsenal, And if she did control the PCA, this just wouldn't happen, of course. And so for now, we are left with little details about this system and what the actual true nature of the PCA is. All we know is that it is an authority that was set up after the fires of Ayre. This of course makes sense given how horrible the fires of Ayre would have been, an apocalyptic event. And so it could have been made by various system governments, or the human government. But alas, we don't know any more other than it uses Institute technology, it's run by an AI, and its purpose is to keep Rubicon sealed. Yet despite the PCA's best efforts, the corporations would find out that Coral was not extinct, and they would return to Rubicon 3. But how did they know, and how were they able to return despite the closure system? Well, both answers can be found in the mysterious organisation known as the Branch. There is a mission where the Rubicon Liberation Front hire us to destroy the Cataphract, lest the corporations get their hand on this advanced PCA technology. During this mission, the Cataphract pilot, a high-ranking captain in the PCA SP, initially recognises us as our borrowed call sign, Raven, and shows some familiarity with that name, saying some pretty revealing things.
Raven, priority target for removal. You've got some nerve showing up here. That leak of yours started all of this. Did you really think we'd let you walk?
Leak? What does he mean?
You've made Rubicon the corporation's playground. We had law and order under the PCA's watch.
It seems as though Raven was the one to leak the situation on Rubicon, and that the PCA were very familiar with him, and the fact they are so angry at him is intriguing to me. Indeed, they also recognise Raven during the fight with the PCA at Bow's Arsenal 2.
It really is Raven.
As if they are familiar with his fighting ability and competency. And so here is my speculation. At the very minimum, Raven clearly worked with the PCA as an independent mercenary, or Raven was a member of the PCA directly. How else would PCA members be so familiar with their competency and their reputation, and have such a personal grudge with them? Either way, why did Raven do this? Well, I believe it to be an ideological reason, as both Raven and the crew he rolls with, the Branch, are very ideological in nature. In both versions of our clash with Raven, either at the spaceport or at the dam, Raven's operator makes it very clear to us what they stand for, and what they believe the Raven call sign represents. It is resolve, and the will to choose.
Are you a corporate pawn or a handler's hound? Either way, you'll never spread your wings. At least not yet. A raven is a symbol of resolve. The will to choose what one fights for.
And Ayre reflects further on this when she returns to the garage.
I've looked into the other Raven, the independent mercenary who attacked you. It turns out that Raven isn't an individual call sign. It's a title, passed down generations of mercenaries who champion the free will Raven stands for.
Free will. Thus perhaps the reason Raven did what they did was to prevent the stifling order of the PCA to continue, bringing anarchy to Rubicon and letting free will reign, no matter what the consequences. And as we will discuss momentarily, the Branch in general seem to champion this idea of free will, not working for a corporation or any employer. There is another possibility, however, as to why Raven did this. It is completely speculative, so bear with me, but there is the possibility that Raven and the Branch are connected to the Allmind release project, or at least are an asset to it. The group that Raven belongs to is known as the Branch, and we learn a little about them thanks to Ayre after our clash with them at the dam.
I've looked into Branch, the independent mercenaries who attacked you. It appears they don't have a fixed membership. Instead, they maintain independence and anonymity with a revolving door of select mercenaries. Now, it seems they've left it to you to champion the free will they stood for. Sooner or later, you'll have to make a choice no one can make for you. When that time comes, I hope I can support you. Raven.
We can learn more about this secretive collective via the arena lore tabs for both Chartreuse and King. We can see that it is a hacktivist collective, and that they were involved in an attack that damaged the closure system. King's lore tab talks about him doing a diversionary tactic on the attack on Station 31, and Chartreuse's lore tab reads the following: held to be a member of the Branch, a hacktivist collective, active in the Rubicon system. Chartreuse is said to have dealt a critical blow to the closure system during the plot to attack Station 31. Now, this is a pretty massive bit of lore, because the closure system is the system that the PCA put in place around Rubicon, the satellites and the orbital guns, to prevent people from trespassing on Rubicon. So let's put all this together. As we looked at earlier in this chapter, Raven is the one who leaked to the corporations that Rubicon still had Coral, and then other members of his group, Chartreuse and King, attacked part of the closure system, damaging it. So not only did the Branch let corporations know that Rubicon was still open for business, they destroyed part of the closure system, making it easier for them to slip back on. They are directly responsible for the state of Rubicon right now. Without them, the corporations would not have known that there was still Coral to be had, and the closure system would have probably prevented them, had it not been for the actions of the Branch. It seems as though everything the Branch did at this stage was to make sure that the corporations could return to Rubicon 3. With that in mind, you have to ask why. And you also have to realise that there's someone else who has an interest in the corporations returning to Rubicon. Allmind. Again, we will get to Allmind in the final chapter, but Allmind needs the corporations for her plan to come to fruition. Indeed, she actually refers to the vascular plant that Arquebus built in the final chapter as the primary factor in the release project, and we see this in the Steel Ortis lore tab if you're wondering. Another question for me is, who is number 4? We hear that there are 4 members of the Branch, revolving members, yet we meet only 3, Raven, King and Chartreuse. This of course makes sense because they are supposed to be anonymous members. The 2 pilots that most fit the bill are Sulla and Kate. These are both independent mercenaries with no known affiliations, and both Kate and Sulla are fully associated with Allmind. This is just my leap in speculation of course, but I start to see all the puzzle pieces fitting together. This is not to say that the Branch is absolutely fully aligned to Allmind, it's just that they may have acted as an asset for her in their pursuit of free will. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide what the motivations of the Branch are, whether they are just sort of anarchists or free will extremists, or if they are aligned to Allmind. But one thing is clear, the Branch, while being a minor bit of the lore, play an absolutely massive role in this story, and it all started with Raven and his Branch fellows. And this is where the story starts largely for Armored Core 6. Half a century has passed after the fires of Ibis, but the corporations have now returned, with a weakened closure system, and news reaching their ears of Coral still existing on Rubicon. An all-out war is brewing on the surface. The 2 most significant players in this new battle would be Balam and Arquebus, with Balam slightly lagging behind the more advanced Arquebus. While they are the main players, they aren't the only ones, and if you dig a little deeper, you'll see that some of the other minor corporations actually play quite a big role. They just do it from the shadows. There is Bows, a weapons manufacturer on the surface, who supply MTs to all factions. There are other minor companies like Furlong Dynamics, Elcano, Takigawa, and Malente, who all supply weapons and AC designs of their own specification, each of them having different specializations. As I say, these just appear to be different companies on the surface who supply weapons, and don't really play a role. But the more you play, the more you realise that these companies are actually working to undermine the other major players by supporting the RLF. Not all of them of course, and probably not because they believe in their cause, rather it serves to upset the power balance between the 2 major players. We first learn of these schemes via a communication in which independent mercenaries seem to be sharing intel. In this, they comment on the scheming of some of these smaller companies. and we find this during the Watchpoint mission. It reads the following. As for the other corps, well, Malente and Takagawa don't seem too ambitious. All they care about is selling their products. Furlong though, they're pretending to be neutral, but you know those crafty foxes would never make a move out in the open. An interesting side note on Furlong is that they appear to have once been a rival to Balam. If you read G2 Niall's lore tab in the arena, you can see that Furlong is named as Balam's rival, and indeed, if you then look at G1 Michigan's lore tab, you can see that he was once a member of Furlong, and was clearly quite a thorn in Balam's side before taking up the role as commander at Balam. And of course it therefore makes sense that Furlong are working to undermine their former rivals, Balam. Indeed, we do find further evidence of Furlong, Bows and Elcano conspiring with the RLF. Firstly, it is the RLF who send us to investigate Bows' arsenal too. While on the surface this makes sense because Bows also produce MTs for the RLF, it is clear there is a deeper connection here that we're not quite getting at this moment. And the true reason for the RLF's concern becomes clear when we get a video log from a Bows dead guard found inside the arsenal, which reads as follows. Gotta move as many units as we can to bankroll Elcano. That's the only way we Rubiconians stand a bankroll Elcano for what? And how does this help the Rubiconians? Well, we get the answer later in Act 4, when we descend into the tunnels below the Watchpoint Alpha, towards Institute City. In this pit before the tunnels, we find a log in the AC of an RLF agent, and it reads the following. I have to get this back to Uncle. Furlong agreed to provide technological assistance. Now the new model can finally be completed. He has to know, before those two destroy each other. So by implication we can get who and what this messenger is talking about. The new model, we will later understand, is Rusty's Steel Haze Ortis, the fancy AC he gets in Act 5. And Uncle has to know that the project is in hand before Rusty and ourselves are tricked into killing one another, as Arquebus has set us up in this mission, and has told both of us to destroy an unnamed mercenary. Indeed, if we have assisted the RLF a lot in our playthrough, Uncle Flatwell will try and intervene, though he will ultimately side with Rusty, who is a long-standing ally of theirs, and who they have invested a lot of money into. The following log is Rusty's encoded comms, which are partially encrypted, and this is one we can find in the mission where Balam wants us to scan wrecks of Rusty's victims during Operation Wall Climber. In this we pick up Rusty's encoded comms, and while we can't understand a lot of it, he does mention Furlong and Elcano again. So we know that Furlong is providing technological or engineering assistance from the log found in Depth 4 of Watchpoint Alpha, but what is Elcano's role? Well, we do get final confirmation via Allmind's integration project, when Ayre hacks into Allmind's classified analysis of advanced models, including the Ortis. Allmind's file on this model reads the following. Elcano has stolen Arquebus technology and used it to develop a new model. The fact this craft has entered the hands of the Rubicon Liberation Front is acceptable. However, the time is not yet right. We must wait for Arquebus to put the primary factor for the project in place. So there we have it. Bows bankrolled this project, Elcano stole the parts for it, and Furlong engineered the AC. 3 different corporations working with the RLF to provide them with a new, powerful weapon. But what is the deal with Rusty? Why is he working with the RLF? Well, I find his arena lore tab to be a little bit suspicious. The details of his origin seem quite shady. Rusty received augmentation before joining the Vespers program, and no one knows the precise details of it. They're just going by his word that he is of the 8th generation. My suspicion is that he has always been a Rubiconian. He is one of the RLF. He is just a talented pilot, and they used him to infiltrate the Vespers program so they would have a man on the inside. When we fight Rusty in Ending A, he always refers to the corporations as they, as if he is not one of them. However, I could be looking far too into this, and it could just be that he is a genuine candidate for the Vespers who moved through the corporate system. It's just that he gained a sense of sympathy for the Rubiconians over time. However, I do believe that he is an infiltrator, and he is a Rubiconian. One potential final bit of evidence that suggests that Rusty has always been a part of the RLF comes again from the mission where we are scanning ruined MTs for Balam to discover more about Rusty. One of these scans reveals a log between a RLF pilot who is trying to communicate with Rusty as Rusty slaughters all of the RLF members during Operation Wall Climber. This log reveals that the RLF member recognizes Rusty and knows already at this stage that Rusty is part of their movement, and so he's confused as to why Rusty is now killing them. So the fact he is a member of the RLF even as far back as we first meet him again suggests that he is playing a long con and he is a Rubiconian. And to answer the RLF's member as to why Rusty is killing them at this stage, it's just deep cover, unfortunately. That's what double agents do all the time. They have to fully commit to their role. But no matter what, I see Rusty as a hero. His motivations are some of the best in the game, in my opinion. Just wanting to free the planet Rubicon and its peoples from the greedy corporations and their exploitation. That is why I will always see the second ending as the best. The one where you bring down the Xylem and side with Ayre and vow to look for a better future for Coral and humanity. While it lacks the finality of the Allmind ending, for example, there is something really epic about fighting one more time with Rusty at your side and watching below as the Rubiconians rise up and throw off the shackles of the corporations. And given we've already started speaking about it, let us now move on to the next chapter, where we will discuss the endings and explain what happens in each of them. I don't think it's necessary for me to break down every single moment of the main story. We have effectively set the stage for the first two endings by discussing the background lore to the game, but let's talk about the basic context to the first two endings of the game. Balam is destroyed, Institute City is revealed, and Arquebus stands victorious, even over us, claiming Institute City, imprisoning us and Walter. Snail played us for fools, let us do all the hard work by killing the Ayre series before incapacitating us. Both 621 and Walter are imprisoned for re-education. Now this sounds very ominous, and we can actually get a hint earlier on about what this re-education program is all about and what it's trying to achieve, thanks to a log found in the Assassinate Swinburne mission. This log is essentially a notice to Arquebus employees about the re-education program. It becomes clear in this log that POWs are to be re-educated or transformed into assets, and it looks like they are looking for ones with some combat skill. Then later on during the escape mission, when we are in the sewers below Institute City, we find another log that details some testing. And in the image we can see some kind of AC being tested, and the description of the video tells us that we are watching an unpiloted AC, and the log reads the following: I see no significant difference in performance compared to what an AI can achieve. How very disappointing. This experiment was another failure then. Regardless, I will have answers. The arrival of ACs brought the age of unpiloted craft to an end, but what essential difference makes them superior? Send a message to the factory. Have them leave the torso intact next time. Now, nothing is said outright here, but some disturbing implications can be found if we read between the lines. It seems as though Arquebus want all the benefits of an unpiloted AC, i.e. ultimate control, and without having to negotiate or deal with a pilot and their ego. Yet they don't want the performance of an AI, they want the performance of a piloted AC. They want the benefits of both. And with the final line about a torso being left intact, the conclusion is clear. They want a human mind implanted into an AC, so it acts like an unpiloted AC, but has the skills of a human pilot. A Frankenstein-esque merging of human and AC. At the close of Chapter 4, when we get the cinematic about Arquebus's victory, we learn that they pillage Institute City, and they found plans for the final Ayre series model, the one that Allmind has also identified, the HAL series, a piloted version of the ISIS automated craft. And so when we face Walter at the end of Path B, Taking all of this lore together, it's quite a horrifying picture. Walter is clearly not himself anymore. He is almost acting like a zombie or a robot. Considering Arquebus are very much obsessed with human augmentation, we can guess what has happened here. Walter was captured alongside us, and he was experimented on in this re-education program. Combined with coral technology and the new Ibis series, there is likely very little left of biological Walter within that suit. This husk is the culmination of the Arquebus re-education program, making one with machine and coral, and he's utterly bent to the corporation's will, a slave within his own mind and what is left of his body. A terrible fate for our friend. While this is Walter's fate, luckily for us, he was planning for this exact scenario. Indeed, even before we leave for the Institute City mission, Walter seems to hint that from here on out we will not have him by our side.
621. From here on out, Never mind. Just trust your instincts.
So when Snail does capture us, we are fortunate that Walter has left a battered old AC among the trash of Institute City for us, showing incredible foresight, and thanks to this foresight we are able to jump in it and escape from the imprisonment of Arquebus. And with the help of Carla, we can now finish our mission on Rubicon. Firstly, we go back to the Institute City known as Xylem, and we learn its true nature as Chatty takes control of it. It is actually a huge, flying city. However, during our imprisonment, Arquebus rebuilt the vascular plant found in Institute City. It now pierces the sky right into the stratosphere, and now it has drawn most of the surviving coral into one place, like a giant vacuum, meaning that now is the time for the observers to reveal themselves and to act, lest the coral density result in an uncontrollable mutation that contaminates the stars, or so they believe. At this stage, a choice is now open to us. We can help the observers fulfill the promise to Nagai and uphold Walter's legacy by burning the coral away. However, during our journey, we have become very close with Ayre, and she has taught us much about the nature of coral. This is a living thing, and together humanity and coral can coexist. Not only that, but burning the coral away would doom Rubicon once more. And while Ayre doesn't have any answers for us right now, we will look together for a new way for humanity and the coral, and Rubicon. Should you choose the former, to burn away the coral, of course Ayre will no longer stand by you, given you are going to burn her and her family. You work with Carla and Chatty to defend Xylem from Arquebus's invading forces, as RAD and the city's defences fight a beleaguered battle, as Arquebus's forces are now bolstered by RI and PCA technology. But of course, 621 turns the tide. Despite losing Chatty, we defeat key Arquebus personnel, and we kill the greatest Vesper pilot, V1 Freud, and this takes the wind out of their assault. Their last-ditch attempt to stop the Xylem is to send their PCA-sourced heavy fleet, but 621 rides out on a coral stream, effortlessly flying between each ship and eviscerating Arquebus's entire fleet. Victory is in sight. Xylem is on a collision course with the coral, and yet there are other forces that would see us fail. Firstly, Rusty, our old friend, an idealist, who would see Rubicon freed, will of course not stand idly by as we subject the planet to another apocalyptic firestorm. He arrives in his new RLF-funded Ortis model, here to stop us. And as we battle one last time on the deck of the Xylem, we put our noble friend to rest. Yet we are still not clear of enemies. The PCA closure system fires upon the Xylem, a warning shot of more to come. It is Ayre who is taking control of this platform. She tells us so herself. And so we move to the platform, while Carla continues to pilot the Xylem. And here we face off against Ayre, a Rubiconian without a body who has now found one. But how did she gain access to this armoured core? Well, the answer comes from the Allmind path during New Game Plus 2, when Ayre hacks the Allmind integration program, and discovers that Allmind has assembled a bunch of Institute autonomous craft. Ayre is able to pilot one of these autonomous craft, and we kind of spar with her in the integration simulation. Ayre then pilots one in the corporeal world during our final battle with Allmind, in order to assist us. And so returning to the Observer ending, we can assume that A. Ayre hacked Allmind the same way and just didn't tell us and found one of these models, or B. Allmind actually gave Ayre this model, as of course what we are doing is screwing up Allmind's plan as well. Either way, Ayre gets access to this, and we have a brutal battle ahead of us as we fight our former friend, who will do anything in her power to stop us from genociding her people, viewing us as the personification of war. But unfortunately for Ayre and all of Coral, she loses to 621. 621's experience more than a match for the extended powers of Ayre's AC, and the Xylem then collides with the Coral, igniting it, and the resulting event is known as the Fires of Raven. Very appropriate given we were the key instrument in this event. Raven is vilified, and even the corporations are haunted by the fallout, and they join the PCA in sealing the planet forever. While this is a brutal end, essentially genociding an entire race, it does at least bring closure to the Rubicon chapter. No one else will have to fight over the Coral, and humanity can remain humanity. Walter even leaves a posthumous message for us, thanking us, because we took on the burdens of the Observers and those that came before. And indeed we do. It is Raven who will be remembered as a monster for doing what they did. And while I empathise with Walter and where he came from, and the reasons he believed in what he did, given what he saw at the Rubicon Institute, I do think that the other path is a better path. We have the benefit of being an objective observer to a degree, and we know there is more to the Coral than it just being a dangerous substance. And we know that the Rubiconians have built their own life and culture upon the planet. And so if you agree with those sentiments, then sticking with Ayre is the right choice. Rewinding in time, during the battle for the Xylem as it flies towards the Coral, Ayre asks us to consider not pursuing Carla and the Observer's plan, and instead siding with her, to help her preserve the Coral and Rubicon. And unfortunately this plan starts with a rather bitter pill. We have to kill Carla, our friend. And so we take down the Observers. And while it's difficult taking down Carla and Chatty, Carla at least respects us for having made a choice, and for having a friend. Yet thankfully not long after, a bit of a palate cleanser comes. We now need to take down the Xylem, and in order to help us, Ayre sends out a message to all of the Rubiconians.
I took the liberty of using your name to rally allies to our aid. Beyond scorched skies, Raven fights on. No one has shaped Rubicon's destiny as much as you have. Come and see what the name Raven means to them.
It is a rallying cry for all those who would see Rubicon free. And the first one to join us is our old friend Rusty. And you have to know you're on the right side if he's joining us.
It looks like the guest of honor's here. Hey, buddy. I never thought I'd be rubbing shoulders with the liberator of Rubicon. Every Rubiconian who heard your cry rose up to fight. Let's show them there's a future for Rubicon beyond these scorched skies.
We are now known as the Saviour of Rubicon, the rallying cry for the final battle. While we take down the Xylem in the sky to save the Coral, the Rubiconians below rise up and shake off the yoke of the corporations once and for all. Rusty takes down the Arquebus heavy fleet, while we have a final showdown with Snail, who is piloting a modified version of the Baltius, and this villain finally meets his end. But on the cusp of our victory, Rusty's comms are sharply cut off, and as we head to the ramjet engines, the final stop on our mission, we know it isn't over yet. And this is when Arquebus's ace in the hole reveals itself, the pinnacle of the re-education program, Walter, who we've already discussed how he got into the zombified state. This is a shell of the man we once knew, mumbling incoherently about the corporation's mission. Yet even through the haze of conditioning, Walter wishes us well, in hopes that we use all of our credits to undo our augmentation and live a normal life. There is some of poor Walter left in there, and killing him as a mercy. And as the Xylem begins to burn up over the atmosphere, we say goodbye to our dear friend, and we watch as the Xylem crashes into the sea below, missing the coral, and we have a new hope for a new future. Rubicon is saved despite the sacrifices of Walter and Rusty, and Ayre shares a hopeful message thanking us for protecting the coral, and promising us that there will be a better future for both coral and humanity. They just need to find it. But with that said, we now need to talk about the third ending, and one of the masterminds of the entire story, Allmind, and its plan for coral release. Allmind is one of the first voices that we encounter when we arrive at Rubicon, and this is such a masterful piece of storytelling, because Allmind is always there, talking to us, giving us updates, and just acting like an automated system, to the point where she becomes almost background noise and we barely notice her by the end of the game. Yet you become concerned about Allmind's actions when she begins the integration program in New Game Plus. Why is Allmind doing this? Who is she running these tests for? Is it not concerning that an AI is trying to work out what makes the perfect AC? And then there is the fact that even if you've done 1 or 2 playthroughs, there are still some holes in the story. Like, who was Sulla working for? Why did they attack us? And who is behind the ghost mechs that attacked us at Bow's Arsenal 2? Well, by New Game Plus 2, you begin to realise that Allmind is a missing piece of the puzzle. Firstly, we don't know where Allmind comes from, it just exists, and yet it has an objective that very much aligns with another character we've looked at, Assistant 1, and that objective is to explore the full potential of humanity and coral combined. It was Assistant 1 who pushed coral technology and research forward, and created the Augmented Human program, the first attempt at merging human with coral. Now, momentarily I will discuss the reason why the invisible mechs, the ghost mechs, are Allmind's agents, and just for reference, these are the mechs that we first fight in Bow's Arsenal 2, but you also fight at the end of Carla's hacking mission when it attacks us and Iguazu. So again, just take that on faith. I will explain why they are connected to Allmind in a moment, but if you look at the design of these ghost mechs, you will realise that they are the same as ones that we face in Xylem City, specifically at the point when you find the drone. At this moment you are attacked by 3 of these ghost mechs out of nowhere, presumably the ones that also destroyed this drone. Yet these ones are not controlled by Allmind, because Xylem City tells us that this is normalization stage B2. These are Institute creations.
Wait! Hostile readings.
Normalization process B2. Deploying antigens.
Fight back, Raven.
And yet now Allmind controls them and uses them to carry out her deeds. Then there is the curious incident at Xylem City when Father Dolmayan attacks us. At this moment, Allmind is able to hack Xylem City and speak directly through Xylem City to us to warn us that Father Dolmayan is coming. Now, of course I want to acknowledge I could just be looking far too into this. Allmind could just be an advanced AI who is able to hack anything, including Institute tech. But because of all of these relations to Institute technology, via her ghost mechs, the fact she is able to hack and control Xylem City, and the fact her objectives align with that of Assistant 1, lead me to believe that Allmind is an Institute creation, and specifically, the creation of Assistant 1. We of course don't know that for sure, we get no further evidence on Allmind's origins, but it all seems to line up for me. In effect, Allmind is carrying on Assistant 1's work, and has great compatibility with Institute tech. Admittedly, there are some holes in this. She doesn't know everything about the Institute, and you would think if she was Institute tech she would. Her file on the Ayre series piloted model in the Arena Lore tab betrays the fact she did not know about this model until recently. There is also a log found in Depth 3 of Watchpoint Alpha that seems to be that of one of her agents, and again this betrays the fact that Allmind's people did not know where Institute City was until this moment. Again, if what I'm suggesting is true, you think Allmind would be familiar with the location of Institute City. That being said, I can't think of any other person who created Allmind, so I will maintain that she is Institute tech. She just didn't know everything or wasn't programmed to know anything, and she did just start as a simple AI who grew and grew. but of course I acknowledge she could just be any tech, any AI who has now grown to have her own ideals about things and is now pursuing this end. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below about the origins of Allmind. But with that speculation out of the way, let's get on to her actions throughout the story. Allmind is the one that's behind Bow's Arsenal 2. In our first playthrough, it's a bit of a mystery what happened here. We've never come across any mechs like this, and the place is just completely silent and we get no answers. However, there are some clues that become more relevant to us later. We discussed earlier the log dropped by a Bow's fallen guard and how it talks about their funding the RLF, but there's something else interesting here. This is their last words before they are killed by some mysterious force, and if you look at the image in this video log, you can see a silhouette, someone standing on the parapets above. This is an AC, and it matches the silhouette of Kate Markson. This is the agent of Allmind that we meet later in New Game Plus 2, and is the first hint that Allmind attacked this facility. Secondly, there are the mysterious mechs themselves, and while we don't get any answers in a normal playthrough as to who's behind them, we do in New Game Plus 2. In an alternate Act 2 Mission 2, we need to help Carla clear out Coyote hacking devices, rather than just defeating Coyotes themselves. At the conclusion of this quest, Iguazu attacks us, apparently hired by the Coyotes, and yet we are both attacked by more of these ghost mechs. These are the exact same ones that were at Bow's Arsenal 2, and they have the exact same coded transmissions. After this mission, Ayre attempts to decode some of these encrypted comms, and something revealing is said.
Raven, I've managed to decode those encrypted comms. They identified you as an impediment to the release project. But what is the release project?
These mechs came after us because we're a threat to the release project, definitively tying these mechs finally to Allmind. She was behind the attack on Bow's Arsenal 2. Why? Because of the coral found within its depths, as if to protect this coral, or at least hide the fact that coral is returning. Indeed, later on when working for Allmind, we team up with Kate Markson to destroy coral transports that are owned by the corporations, so they cannot study the coral. Allmind wants to strictly limit the access to coral, so its secrets are protected. Indeed, in the alternate Bow's Arsenal 2 mission, Raven and Kate destroy a PCA inspection team so they don't learn of the coral found within its well. And this connection to these mysterious ghost mechs also answers one of the longest standing questions you have in the game. Who is Sulla working for? Because when you do an alternate version of this mission, he is accompanied by 4 of these ghost mechs who are working with him, confirming that he is part of the Allmind project. This also explains why Allmind glitches when we load up the Sulla arena simulation. It's as if Allmind is mad that Sulla is gone, or because she was going to wipe him from the system, much as she does to us near the end of the Allmind path. Need any further proof? Well, when Allmind later explains that the release project requires certain augmented humans, a few candidates on a blurry list are highlighted, and we spoke about this earlier how it only contains the first 4 generations of augmented humans. But a few actual call signs are actually highlighted, including C1249. This is Sulla.
C1249. Sulla. He's an independent mercenary who survived first-gen augmentation.
So for me, Sulla was clearly being groomed for the position we now occupy within the project, the key to release. When Sulla confronts us at the watchpoint, Walter asks Sulla who told him that we were here. How could anyone possibly know? Well, the answer is Allmind. She's always listening through our comms with Walter. She simply leaked the details of the missions to one of her agents. This is why she is so effective in her plans. Everyone operates through her system, not thinking she is anything more than just a system. And she is always listening and always planning. Sulla is sent to the watchpoint to stop us for similar reasons that Kate is sent to the Bow's Arsenal, to stop coral being tampered with, or even discovered. So let's try and unpack her greater plan. Firstly, she uses the arena, and then extrapolates this data into the integration system, by which she hopes to find the perfect armoured core, as well as understanding what makes a skilled pilot, for purposes that become painfully obvious in our final showdown. In Chapter 1, she tries and fails to contain coral stores, first at Bow's Arsenal 2, and then at the Watchpoint. Allmind betrays a level of frustration at Handler Walter's meddling actions. In her file on the HAL Ibis model, as it reads, "The last of the Ibis series has made itself known. We have identified a promising candidate to serve as the project's secondary factor. This machine must be destroyed to remove any further obstructions. That man has greatly delayed our efforts to put the third factor in place. Revisions must be made." So let's go through the release plan and what Allmind is actually trying to achieve, so we can understand what these factors are. The primary factor is mentioned in the Steele Hayes Ortiz file that we looked at earlier, and given the context of mentioning Arquebus, we can assume that the primary factor is the vascular plant, or at least a device that would gather all of Coral to one location. I mentioned earlier a log found on one of her agents in Depth 3 of Watchpoint Alpha. It's interesting because in this file it says that they will indirectly be helping Arquebus, and this is why. They want the corporations to succeed to a point, so that they can gather all of Coral into one place. And again, this goes back to what we discussed in the branch chapter, and why I think they may be sort of aligned with Allmind. Because of their actions, the corporations were able to return, and Allmind's plan was able to proceed. Factor 2 and 3 are mentioned in the Ibis model file that we just looked at, and working out Factor 2 and 3 is where it gets a little tricky. I initially thought that we were Factor 2, that we were the ideal candidate, because we acted as a bridge, and us and Ayre together act as the trigger for the Coral release. However, this makes Factor 3 more difficult. Factor 3 is something that Walter has interfered with, and the only thing I can really think of is killing Sulla. And so in actuality, I think that we are Factor 3, and that by killing Sulla, someone who was already keyed up to be the Coral release trigger, we have delayed the plans of Allmind. And this is why in the normal 2 endings, when we don't interact with Allmind in this way, she doesn't make her plans happen because she doesn't have a new candidate to serve as the key for Coral release. And this would explain her frustration at Walter. Walter was the one who sent us to the Watchpoint, and Walter was the one that commanded us to kill Sulla, and we did. So I think we are Factor 3. So who's the ideal candidate for Factor 2? Well, I think that is Iguazu, because the 3 main factors in Allmind's success are these things: having the Coral in one place, Factor 1, having someone to act as a bridge between Coral and augmented human, Factor 3, which is us. But then the other part of Allmind's plan, the main thing that she does throughout the game, is the integration program and the making of the ideal AC. If you look at the lore tabs of the integration program arena combatants, you can see the development of Allmind's thought process. She first of all has Mind Beta, and it reads the following: "Drawing from evaluations thus far, Allmind has updated the Mind Alpha model. The revised model features an AI that benefits from the breadth of Allmind's research archives. Allmind anticipates that this new model, Mind Beta, can autonomously operate in actual combat at the same level as a highly skilled mercenary. And yet we defeat this model with quite a lot of ease, to be honest." And then we move on to the next generation of her integration project, Mind Gamma, and this time it reads the following: "Drawing from the evaluations thus far, Allmind has updated the Mind Beta model. This new Mind model is assembled from parts that have been verified for high compatibility with the traits of older generations of augmented humans." So following all of her evaluations, us destroying all of her models essentially, being a Generation 4 ourselves, she comes to the conclusion that she needs to replicate our success. And who is one of the only other Generation 4 candidates that we know? That's right, Iguazu, who also has a personal hatred for us. Thus, I think he is the ideal candidate for Factor 2. Factor 2 being the creation of the perfect AC model to carry out Allmind's plans. Factor 2 more generally is Allmind's muscle, her ability to defeat her enemy AC pilots. And she does. She destroys Carla and Walter pretty easily. And so to surmise the 3 factors of Allmind's plans, we have the primary factor, the gathering of Coral by the corporations. We have Factor 2, the creation of the perfect AC model via the integration program, and having an ideal candidate to pilot these Iguazu. And then factor 3 is ourselves, an augmented human that can bridge the gap between humanity and Coral. It was once Sulla, Walter delayed that by killing him, and now we are the chosen candidate. As for how Iguazu is part of Allmind, well, we can already see how this is possible. Even in the arena integration fights, she is able to replicate other human combatants. And during the final battle with Allmind, Iguazu's voice speaks up saying that he agreed to become part of this project in order to take revenge against us. And so I don't think it's wild to suggest that he submitted his brainwaves and scans voluntarily to become part of Allmind. And so if we help Allmind, everything goes to plan. Xylem is under her control, the Coral has all been gathered in one place, and her enemies, the Observers, have been destroyed by her perfect model. Yet there is one final point to her plan, and this is another reason why she needs Factor 2, that unparalleled AC. She needs to absorb us. By definition, Allmind means that everyone should be one, and she cannot abide the fact that the trigger, the key component to the Coral release plan, is not part of her mind. We are irregulars to her.
You are aberrations to the plan.
Irregulars. We will bring order to chaos.
And so while ourselves and Ayre agree with the plan for Coral release, we will not bow to this AI that has clearly gone out of control. And so in an epic showdown, ourselves and Ayre take down Allmind's perfect AC and put the ghost of Iguazu to rest. As Allmind shuts down, we promise her that we will fulfill her plan, but we will do it ourselves. And understanding the true nature of Coral release is a little difficult, but if I was to guess, we are the sort of template for the future. We are human and Coral combined already, and we have the will, the individuality, to make the Coral behave in this way, and so it bursts out across space. Raven finally becomes fully one with the Coral alongside Ayre, and we are disseminated across space. Whether other humans are caught up in this wave and become part of the Coral network as well is unclear, but what is clear is that Ayre and Raven are now one, part of the neural network of the Coral, and are spread everywhere in multiple different places. This is what people like O'Keefe and Nagai feared. Again, it depends on your perspective, but people like O'Keefe didn't want to go through with this plan because you weren't human anymore, and as much as being a human sucks, at least it is a life we can understand and enjoy. And living as a coral particle spread out throughout space is a little bit eldritch and maybe not everyone's cup of tea. But there you have it, Coral release is achieved, Allmind is defeated, and us and Ayre can meet this new age together. So while I feel like this is a complete video, there are of course some questions that I wasn't able to touch on. There are so many mysteries in Rubicon, and maybe in future videos I will go deeper into them. But there's one final lingering question I want to ask before we end this video, and that is what happened to Walter's previous hounds. In the story trailer we see them taking on a PCA cataphract and taking out some sort of installation. But later in game when Carla asks Walter what happened to these hounds, Walter said they did their job and they got us here. How did they get us here? What mission was this that allowed us to do what we did during the main campaign? We can only guess, but there is a specific reason that Walter is in the Bellius region. Perhaps this mission revealed some intel from the PCA that hinted at the Coral's location within Bellius, and indeed it was, both in Bow's Arsenal 2 and in the Watchpoint. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think Walter's hounds achieved here when fighting the PCA cataphract? The other question I would have would be regarding the Protect the Strider alternate mission we get in New Game Plus 2. In this alternate version of events, we are tasked by the Liberation Front to protect the Strider, and yet when we arrive it is already being destroyed, and it turns out the assailants are automated sea weapons from the Rubicon Institute. Now, given this is at the same time we are doing the Allmind path, logic would dictate that it was Allmind who sent these craft after the Strider. Why? Well, because the Strider is actually a thing designed to suck up and mine Coral. We have seen plenty of examples of Allmind taking steps to protect the coral. Perhaps this is no different. Or perhaps they are simply after us. Again, there are plenty examples of Allmind sending mechs after us, as we are at this stage an impediment to the coral release program. But there are some issues with this. Firstly, we aren't an impediment yet. We haven't yet killed Sulla, nor have we gone to Bow's Arsenal 2 and discovered the coral, so there's no real reason for Allmind to be going after us at this stage. And aside from anything else, there's no other instance that I can think of where Allmind directly controls some sea weapons. And we've already discussed the log found in Depth 3 of Watchpoint Alpha from one of her agents that suggests she doesn't know the location of Institute City at this stage in the game. So where would she get access to these automated sea weapons? So what is another explanation for this? Well, it could be a little bit out there, but another explanation I have for it is that this is the coral itself. When we go to Institute City, we face off against the Ayre model, and as we've discussed, this is piloted and controlled by the coral. It's an instinctive reaction to defend itself. Again, remember the Strider is actually a mining platform used to draw out coral. Perhaps this is an instinctive reaction by the coral to defend itself from this mining tool. But again, this is all just speculation, and we don't get really any answers definitively on this bizarre mission. Again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below about what you think happens here. And that's where I'm going to leave you today with this video. If you did like this video, please consider hitting a like and subscribing to the channel, as I am a lore channel, and I'm sure to have plenty more content for you to enjoy. I know certain aspects of this were speculation heavy, so please let me know your arguments and discussions in the comments below. I do enjoy a good lore debate. But until next time guys, I will see you on the scorched plains of Rubicon 3. Take care, and have a wonderful evening.